Have you ever seen one quiet moment change the atmosphere in a room and wonder how that could change everything? In a world of din and division, a single steady voice can reset the conversation. You won't believe what one quiet action changed about a tense Senate hearing and left a whole country pondering. Press play to get in. Have you ever seen a moment when words were like sparks in a still room? A moment that would last long after it had vanished? In a quiet room, amidst the bite of barbed words and the burden of ancient beliefs, two vastly different voices came together, and something quite remarkable resulted. It wasn't a conflict of politics or of generations, but a character test. A test of how we listen, how we react, and how we draw strength when we need it most. In an era where the world seems more divided than ever before, moments like these can leave us with the question, what opens hearts? The voice of conviction, or the silence that provides it with space to expand? This is the tale of a watershed day in the Senate, a page in the continuing dialogue about who we are, what we believe in, and how we treat each other when it counts. Come on in and see how one soft-spoken voice reorganized the room, and maybe reorganized us all. You might have thought this was another ordinary day in the Senate, but what transpired would be discussed for years to come. It began as one of those seemingly normal hearings, a disagreement over climate policy and the Green New Deal. And then, in a flash, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez brought the room to a standstill. In the middle of the television broadcast, she snapped into a biting personal attack on Senator John Kennedy. She ridiculed his antiquated Southern manner, calling him a joke in front of all those watching. But what followed was more than Kennedy's comeback. It was a lesson in grace, cuttingness, and a sort of indigenuously American kind of wit. What he told them left the entire Senate and much of the nation unable to look away. Before we get into the story, leave a comment on where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more like this. The hearing room was charged that day, nearly eerily quiet, as if a storm was building. AOC moved towards the podium, her voice firm and authoritative. "Dear colleagues," she began, sweeping her eyes over the room until they came to rest directly on Kennedy, who sat quietly, arms crossed, that unmistakable Southern composure. "We're discussing the destiny of this world," she snapped, "about destructive storms, about towns being washed away, about the price in human lives. But it's difficult to maintain a serious demeanor when one person in this room makes a farce of the entire thing, as if he's at some county fair." She paused for a moment, a cold smile spreading on her lips, then jabbed her finger at him. "Senator Kennedy," she told him, slow and crisp, to make sure every word hit home, "you are a joke, and not the one that brings people laughter." A few of the younger senators, AOC's allies, smiled quietly, but most in the room gave each other uneasy looks. A few raised their brows, obviously disturbed by the barb. In the back, reporters were typing away frantically, sensing a headline in the making. The cameras panned in on Kennedy, recording every second. But the seasoned politician didn't budge. Not a word escaped his mouth. No smile, no scowl. He just fixed AOC with his sharp-eyed gaze. That silence only emboldened AOC. Her tone grew, with more edge this time. "You speak of economic costs, Senator Kennedy," she pushed. "But do you get the true cost of inaction? In districts like the one I represent in the Bronx, families live with flooding, with pollution, with heartbreak on a daily basis. They don't want farmer speak or wink and a nod. They want action. They want vision. Someone who sees the urgency of the moment." She waved a hand as if to carve those words into the air for all to remember. "You may think your folksy charm is clever, but on this issue, you're nothing more than a bystander. Someone too out of touch to recognize how serious this crisis really is." A few spots of applause erupted from AOC's loyal supporters, though others held their tongues. One neutral senator in the back shook her head quietly, mouthing to a neighbor. Even an aide to one of AOC's own, a small figure to the side, grinned with pride. But a touch of concern flashed across their eyes, as though questioning whether this assault had crossed the line. Meanwhile, reporters started exchanging knowing looks. They could sense this was about to become the defining moment of the entire hearing. AOC, feeling all eyes on her, pressed her attack harder. She stepped closer, locking her gaze on Kennedy. But Kennedy didn't flinch, not even a little. He tilted his head slightly, as if weighing every word AOC threw at him. His fingers tapped lightly on the table, lightly enough to almost be imperceptible. The cameras didn't miss a single detail. The glint of light from his glasses, the hard but calm gaze he returned. There was no trace of anger, no whiff of discomfort. There was merely quiet assurance, like a man used to being discounted, waiting for the time to fire back. At the back of the room, a journalist from a leading paper leaned in towards a colleague and whispered, "She just stirred a hornet's nest. Kennedy doesn't go easily." But AOC, seemingly unaware, kept pressing. "We need leaders who dare to think big, who dare to act, not people who just sit there cracking cheap jokes," she said, voice rising. "Senator Kennedy, if you can't contribute more than quips, maybe you should step aside for those who truly want to save this planet." Her words were like an arrow shot directly at Kennedy's integrity. She stood there, bracing herself, waiting for him to crumble under the force of her accusations. But the room didn't shatter. Kennedy didn't jump back with a retort. The silence itself acted as a weapon, causing AOC, still assured, still fearless, to shift, a fleeting sense of discomfort crossing her face. A conservative senator sitting close to her smiled weakly, as though aware that the best was about to come. Another journalist took out a phone, capturing every second, sure this moment would take over social media by morning. AOC continued, pushing to make her point stick. "I represent the future generation," she asserted. "Those who have to live with the effects of delay. We don't have time for humor, Senator Kennedy. We require action. Now." She spoke out, and she leaned back in her chair, still gripping Kennedy with a pointed, critical look. There was a scattering of applause from the supporters, but it was not as strong as she had hoped. Meanwhile, all the heads in the room were beginning to turn to Kennedy, watching to see how he would respond. Then Kennedy cleared his throat, a gentle, measured sound that demanded quiet. Everyone's eyes popped to him. When he finally spoke, it was in that warm southern drawl, slow and deliberate. Each word dropped like a stone on a chessboard. "Miss Ocasio-Cortez," he started, holding her gaze. "I came from a small town where people don't yell to get their point across. I attended the best schools, not to brag, but to learn one thing clearly. Words carry weight only if supported by truth, not volume." He stood there for a second, allowing that to sink in, and the room seemed smaller, quieter, hanging on every word. Some conservative senators smiled inwardly, but neutral ones leaned forward, attracted by the understated power of Kennedy's response. "You talk about action, and I do. This world requires action, but action isn't big-ticket promises that working folks have to pay for down the road. I stand with working families, folks who don't have time for flashy solutions, but who are entitled to honest, sensible answers they can rely on." Whispers ran around the room. It was as if the entire hearing had shifted, and Kennedy still wasn't done yet. Reporters began scribbling wildly, feeling like Kennedy was gaining the upper ground. AOC, not about to let that happen, leapt to her feet, putting her hands on her hips. Her voice rose hotly, passionate and urgent. "Senator Kennedy," she replied, "you speak of working people, but do you really get what they are experiencing? What is it like when their houses are washed away by hurricanes? What is it like to breathe smoke-filled air? They don't need slick language. They need bold action, Actions like the Green New Deal. She moved forward, her words blazing like fire, as if she were attempting to overwhelm Kennedy with sheer willpower. But Kennedy did not blink. He leaned in slightly, looked at her with a calm, assured stare, and gave a minimal smile. Not a sneering one, but the smile of a man who knows where he is. "Miss Ocasio-Cortez," he replied slowly, "I know my people. They're the ones toiling from dawn till dusk. The ones who don't want to hear a lot of highbrow speech that leaves them drowning in debt. If we're going to discuss policy, then let's discuss how we pay for it, rather than discussing how I speak." His words were soft but cutting, and they elicited appreciative nods from a few impartial senators. AOC's allies shot nervous looks at each other. The room was sweltering, warming up as this confrontation between these two senators boiled over. AOC, feeling the momentum, would not be swayed. She pushed further, voice growing louder as she flung her hands wide to emphasize. "You can speak of costs all day long, but you're avoiding the crux. We can't delay any longer. Young folks, neighborhoods such as mine, are hurting at this moment. Do you genuinely believe your homespun phrases can assuage the gales out there?" She froze, staring at Kennedy, daring him to crack. But Kennedy did not. Instead, he shrugged, a movement so close to casual, yet so calculated. He got up for the first time during the hearing slowly, and the room fell silent. "You refer to storms, Miss Ocasio-Cortez," he replied softly, as if a man who'd learned a difficult lesson. "I know storms in Louisiana. I've seen houses wash away and families lose everything. I'm not here to be an actor. I'm here to ensure the solutions that we're creating don't engulf those families in more debt. If you want to call it folksy, fine. My people call it the truth." His words fell like a sledgehammer, quietly, but hard enough to rattle the room. A few of the conservative senators softly applauded, while AOC's team went silent. In the rear, a reporter leaned toward a coworker and softly whispered, "He just made her attack his benefit." The cameras stayed glued on Kennedy as he sat down, still staring fixedly at AOC, a silent, aggressive stare. AOC, while taken aback for a moment, would not yield an inch. She took a deep breath, stood ramrod straight, and responded curtly. "Senator, your truth is merely another form of delay. The Green New Deal is not a fantasy. It's a blueprint to save our future. And if you can't keep pace, perhaps you should step aside for those courageous enough to act." She slumped back into her chair, still clutching Kennedy with a fiery glare. But Kennedy, seemingly in an unearthly state of calm, gave the slightest smile, a twinkle of mischief in his eyes. The air was charged, crackling like a forge in which every comment struck like a spark. Reporters clacked away even more frantically, confident this battle was far from over. A senator's aide whispered in an ear, "Kennedy's playing the long game." And around the room, every head was glued to these two senators, recognizing this was a moment that would last long after the hearing was completed. AOC, still unbroken from her scathing rebuke, sensed the room's attention on her. Her eyes flared, not with uncertainty, but with raw determination. She knew this was not just a climate debate. This was an opportunity to stand apart, to test herself in front of her peers and the country. The cameras monitored like unblinking eyes, and the reporters in the rear frantically wrote, knowing that this moment would own social media in hours. AOC took a deep breath. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, and there was a small strand that swayed as she leaned forward toward the podium. Her voice fell, cutting like a knife through the silence. "Senator Kennedy," she stated, hands clamped together, fingers tapping as if holding down a wave of rising emotion. "You talk about working people. But do you really hear their wails when hurricanes blow their houses away? Do you recognize that when disaster hits tiny towns you pretend to speak for, those individuals don't require eloquent words regarding practical solutions? They require bold action. A vision, such as the Green New Deal, not hesitation masquerading as rural bon mots. She used the word rural with a subtle sting, her eyes focused on Kennedy as if attempting to pin him down. The chamber reacted with sporadic applause from her own ranks, swiftly overpowered by an undertone of quiet tension from impartial senators. One conservative senator shook his head, clearly disapproving of the personal attack. In the meantime, a young staffer in the back, badge reading AOC, nibbled her lip, her eyes a combination of pride and concern. A journalist in the rear scribbled down the adjective hesitation and smiled weakly as though aware it would appear in thousands of headline news. The camera lenses refused to turn away from Kennedy, holding their breath for him to react to this latest barrage of attacks. But Kennedy, steadfast as a boulder in a torrent, didn't budge. He sat, hands neatly folded, a hint of wickedness in his piercing eyes. He didn't get up. He didn't hurry. He merely leaned forward a fraction, measuring every word, as if carefully selecting the optimal spot to strike the next blow. AOC sensed his silence and pushed further, moving to one side, voice swelling with an electrified energy that had the quality of a play's climax. "We're in the 21st century," she declared, raising hands as if setting the stakes into place for everyone to witness. "We can't allow outdated minds hold us back from the progress we require. You might speak for Louisiana, but you're forgetting the younger generations, those crying out for a cleaner, brighter tomorrow. Can't you see that, Senator? Or are you too busy with jokes to hide your lack of vision?" Her words sailed like a fiery arrow, directly targeting Kennedy's integrity. A handful of progressive senators applauded, but it seemed half-hearted. One neutral senator let out a quiet sigh, looking between Kennedy and AOC as if hoping the scene would be over soon. A reporter realigned their tablet, writing a headline that would likely read, "AOC pushes Kennedy to the limit." AOC, sensing the tension in the room, wouldn't let up. "I'm here for the hurt communities," she declared, her voice trembling ever so slightly with emotion. "Individuals who don't have time for hollow phrases or witty one-liners. If you can't meet the moment, Senator Kennedy, then get out of the way, and let those who have the courage to dream big do the work that must be done." And then there was a change. Kennedy, for the first time, raised an eyebrow, an almost imperceptible, subtle gesture that told those who were paying close attention that the old senator was about to respond. He didn't rise, didn't make a show. But when his tone rose, it was measured, firm, and heavy, with a man determined to make every word count. "Has gravity and can survive the ages." He talked in a soft voice, as if a calm wind before a storm. "Miss Ocasio-Cortez," he continued, each sentence calculated, "I'm not here to dispute who has the grandest dream. I'm here to ensure that dreams don't turn into burdens for the people you say you are fighting for. You speak about storms. I've witnessed them. I've walked through devastated towns. I've met the families trying to piece their lives back together. Those folks don't need costly promises. They need plans that work without making them pay a price they can't afford." Each word landed like a stone dropped in a calm lake, sending ripples across the room. A few senators, especially those from rural states, nodded quietly, responding to the sincerity in Kennedy's voice. AOC stood firm. She shot up abruptly, her voice trembling with indignation and urgency. "Senator, is that what you mean by realism? I say it's a cop-out. People don't want excuses. They want action pronto. If you can't keep abreast of the times, then don't obstruct those who can." The words were delivered with a sinking back into her seat, eyes locked unyieldingly on Kennedy as if she was proclaiming a triumph. But Kennedy didn't blink. Instead, he gave a slight, wry smile. Not a sneering one, but the smile of a man who's playing a long game. He leaned in, placing his hands on the table, and spoke slowly and precisely. "Miss Ocasio-Cortez, I am not avoiding. I simply wish to ensure that when we promise the American people something, we have the ability to deliver. If being called backward in your book is the price of keeping our word, then so be it. Some conservative senators nodded in agreement, while AOC's group cast uncertain glances about, sensing Kennedy reaching more solid ground. The air in the room was charged like an arena, AOC and Kennedy poles apart, neither giving an inch. Journalists sensed the change, the tension crackling like a stretched wire waiting to break. They began filing rough drafts with their editors, aware this day would lead the news and burst onto social media. A staffer in the office of an independent senator leaned over and said, "She's cornering him, but Kennedy hasn't landed his last punch." AOC had recently sat, acid words still lingering in the air. Her own eyes flared, sure she had landed a knockout punch. Yet her colleagues shared worried glances, knowing Kennedy, in his careful silence, waited for a return shot. The room was tense like a ship changing direction in a hurricane, the air thickening with each breath. The cameras zoomed in. Kennedy cleared his throat. The light hit the rim of his glasses, and his hands were now spread out on the table, open and ready like a seasoned player to make his last move. And then Kennedy stood very slowly, straightening his tie as if every moment was his own. The room waited. He didn't hurry, didn't shout. Rather, he stood silent until every ear was attuned to him. His eyes swept the room and froze when they reached AOC. Smooth as a slow river, he spoke in that rich drawl, each word precise and calculated. "Miss Ocasio-Cortez," he began, voice rich with conviction. "I'm not here to compete over who speaks louder, or who spins the prettiest dream. I'm here to talk about what truly lasts, what can stand the test of time, and more than anything, what will truly help the people we're all here to serve. Matters to the American people, not flashy promises, but solutions they can truly count on." The room fell into an eerie silence, as if every person felt drawn into the gravity of Kennedy's words. A neutral senator in the middle row leaned forward, curiosity lighting their eyes. An aide for AOC stopped texting, sensing the shift. Kennedy was gaining ground. He continued, voice strong but sincere. "You talk about storms, floods, and struggling communities. I've walked through those waterlogged streets in Louisiana. I've spoken to families who lost their homes and their livelihoods. They don't need a grand speech about the big picture that leaves them buried in debt. They need someone to listen, to understand, and to—" The words were like a cool, refreshing wind flowing over the room, tempering the tension. A couple of conservative senators nodded in agreement. Even some of AOC's supporters, although loyal, couldn't deny the subtle power in Kennedy's reasoning. AOC clenched her hands together tightly, a flicker of apprehension appearing in her eyes, even as she attempted to keep up the confident face. Before she could open her mouth and respond, Kennedy, ever the seasoned chess player making a tactical move, brought up a hand. Not sharply, but with the soft, authoritative presence that told. He addressed her softly, voice lowering like a raconteur leading the room to its denouement. "You call me backward, Miss Ocasio-Cortez, but being backward is when you say more about what people wish to hear rather than what they actually need. I'm not here to be a performer. I'm here to ensure that each and every tax dollar goes where it ought to, and that each policy we enact doesn't send hard-working Americans into the ground with more weights. If that makes me folksy, then I'll wear it proudly, because at least I'm standing on the side of the truth." That line landed like a hammer. The room erupted in applause, not just from Kennedy's staunch allies, but from neutral senators too, swayed by the sincerity and grit of his words. AOC, for the first time, stumbled. She sat up straight, her eyes faltering, looking for a retort. A reporter close to the door leaned over to a friend and said, "He just turned the tables. This is Kennedy's moment." The cameras caught every angle, the slight smile playing on Kennedy's lips, the quiet determination in his eyes, and the way he leaned back in his chair like a man who knew he'd landed a knockout punch. But AOC did not back down. Standing up, voice increasing in fervor, she shook a finger at Kennedy. "Senator Kennedy," she snapped, "you speak of truth, but the truth is that you're holding up progress. The Green New Deal isn't fantasy. It's the only way to save the planet. You can speak of costs, but the cost of delay is paid in the lives of millions." Her voice trembled with emotion, and the room went silent once more. But now this silence was different. It no longer leaned in her direction. Her words, though ardent, were no longer infused with the bite they once had when Kennedy had spoken. Kennedy did not stand up. He did not speak loudly. He simply cocked his head, gaze locked on AOC, and spoke with a soft, resolute calm. "Miss Ocasio-Cortez, I'm not standing in the way of progress. I simply want progress that doesn't abandon hard-working individuals. If you call that delay, I call it responsibility." Several senators applauded, quietly firm, enough that AOC realized she was no longer in command. It was as if the chessboard had just shifted in Kennedy's favor. One reporter, tablet held out, started typing a draft for the newsroom, sure this clip would go viral in the next few hours. Aide to a moderate senator leaned over and, nearly awed, said, "Kennedy just changed the game." AOC, still attempting to come across as strong, didn't immediately react. She slumped into her chair, her gaze sweeping the room as if seeking a means to recoup lost ground. But this moment belonged to Kennedy now. The room, and the cameras, were his. This confrontation with Kennedy seemed greater than a disagreement. It seemed like something of an event, a pivot that would redefine how this hearing would be remembered. Journalists typed more furiously, sensing the gravity. A conservative senator to one side of Kennedy patted him on the back, his eyes flashing with admiration, as if to say he had accomplished what few believed could be done. Meanwhile, AOC, still proud, still fiery, seemed to sense that she had miscalculated her opponent. The Senate chamber was as if rearranged by a silent earthquake. Kennedy's words, cutting, deliberate, and serene, lingered in the air. AOC fought to keep her tough face intact, but her hands shook slightly as she placed them on the table. Her eyes darted from ally to ally, seeking an anchor. The room, once electric with tension from her attacks, now leaned toward Kennedy, shrouded in a silence greater than any clapping. Cameras recorded every movement, Kennedy's quick, assertive stare, and the subtle shadow of fear crossing AOC's face. Reporters' pencils flew across their notebooks, aware this moment heralded an irrevocable shift. One of the middle-row neutral senators cleared their throat, shattering the silence. The gentle sound served as a signal, eliciting subtle glances and gestures throughout the room. One silver-haired senator leaned in toward an aide and whispered. Kennedy turned a jab into a lesson. The whisper, while quiet, ran through the neutral faction, eliciting nods of accord. A conservative senator had his hand resting on Kennedy's shoulder, grinning with subdued pride, as if to say that he had accomplished what few had anticipated. AOC's devoted followers shared apprehensive murmurs. The fire in their eyes had not been extinguished, but it flickered, soft and insecure. AOC, feeling the change in the atmosphere, stood up again. This time her voice was no longer laced with its initial bite. She took a deep breath, attempting to call upon the confidence that had sustained her assault. "I have a great deal of respect for Senator Kennedy's opinion," she declared, voice softer, with defiance laced now. "But I'm here for the people who are suffering, for those who can't wait any longer. I just hope you'll think about what young people are demanding, and why it matters." Some of her supporters greeted the move with half-hearted applause, as if a flame burning low. A journalist in the back scribbled down the term delay, aware that it would not be sufficient to change the course of things. Kennedy did not answer immediately. Instead, he nodded slightly, respectfully, a low-key, telling movement that was so much more than a simple nod. He settled back into his chair, fingers interlocked, eyes sharp. The silence was heavier than any words. At that moment, he seemed to have made his last move in a long, strained game of chess. A neutral senator's staffer, hovering near the door, leaned over and told a fellow sycophant, "She made an effort, but Kennedy won this round." The television cameras caught it all. The opposing photos of Kennedy's steady calm and AOC's quiet last stand. The chamber seemed like a frozen painting, each individual sipping quietly on what had transpired. A liberal senator close to AOC casually laid a hand on her arm, sending a hushed, encouraging look. The moment eloquently said it all, an instant that would define the destiny of words and silence entwine victories. Even AOC's staunchest supporters offered quiet gestures of comfort. A hand on her shoulder, a glance that said, "We've got your back." Yet deep down it was clear to everyone in the room that Kennedy had reshaped how he was viewed. An old journalist with gray hair began writing a story that would quickly clog the internet. Not of AOC's biting criticisms, but of Kennedy's unflappable composure. The camera slowly moved, capturing neutral senators inclining toward Kennedy, their faces in deep contemplation. In the background, a sound technician tweaked a microphone, producing a small sound that was akin to a period at the end of this explosive episode. That noise served as a signal, and instantaneously the room sprang to life. Journalists clattered away on keyboards, dispatching stories to their editors. Headlines flashed like lightning across screens. Kennedy turns tables on AOC, historic Senate duel. A young staffer with an AOC badge bent their head, texting wildly, doubtlessly updating their crew. At the same time, Kennedy smiled slightly to a coworker, a quiet gleam of satisfaction in his eyes. Not arrogance, but the confident serenity of a man who had faced a test and come out stronger. The tension that began as a hot conflict had become a respectful quiet. Not only for Kennedy, but for the way he had taken a personal attack and made it a lesson in responsibility. An impartial senator, rising to get a glass of water, leaned over to a senator and whispered, "That's why he's always underestimated. He doesn't need to shout to win." The phrase, barely whispered, soon spread around the room like a benediction on Kennedy's quiet triumph. In a matter of minutes after the hearing concluded, a 3-minute video of Kennedy's calm response appeared online. Posted by an independent journalist with the title, "Kennedy Silences AOC in Climate Debate," it went viral on Twitter, garnering millions of impressions within an hour and unleashing a tempest of remarks, shares, and hashtags. "Kennedy just proved to the world you don't have to scream to win," one user posted, sharing a meme of Kennedy as a boxer captioned, "Knockout by composure." Meanwhile, TikTok was abuzz. A Texas teenager recreated Kennedy's Southern drawl on camera with a film background soundtrack, gaining hundreds of thousands of likes. College students recreated the scene, one as AOC, hot-headed and combative, and the other as Kennedy, calm and incisive. The skit rapidly became trending. Even Instagram, which generally doesn't linger much on politics, was a hall of Kennedy quotes in black and white on clean, artistic backgrounds. The phrase, "listening, not shouting, is strength," suddenly proliferated everywhere. Not everyone was in Kennedy's corner, however. AOC's defenders, particularly young activists, mobilized on social media, coming to her defense. One popular Twitter user posted, "AOC told the truth about climate action." Kennedy just evaded with gushy one-liners. A YouTube video from an environmental activist made a passionate case that AOC was fighting for the future and Kennedy was offering delays and distractions. Social media became a battleground, with posts, threads, and reels flooding in on both sides. The tension carried over outside of social media. Mainstream news outlets joined the fray. CNN broadcast a long piece entitled, "AOC's Passion versus Kennedy's Calm, a Clash of Generations," observing that AOC spoke from the heart but lost neutral viewers with her personal insults. Fox News spun the moment as a win for Kennedy, the veteran who showed he didn't need to shout to get the room. It was a moment that would set a chapter in American politics, one in which two approaches clashed, shifting the dialogue and reminding the country that occasionally strength is at its brightest when shrouded in stillness, unbreakable resolve. Fox News portrayed Kennedy as a symbol of strength and dignity, publishing an article entitled "Kennedy Teaches AOC a Lesson in Composure," and calling him a champion of traditional values resisting overzealous progressivism. According to one commentator, Kennedy didn't just win the debate, he won the heart of real America. In contrast, independent media such as The Hill and Politico were more cautious, delving into the greater meaning of the confrontation. A Politico article entitled "Clash in the Senate, a Mirror of America's Divide," posited that the spectacle was a reflection of a generational and regional division. AOC for youthful urban activists, and Kennedy as the voice of right-wing rural communities. The piece quoted a political analyst stating, "Kennedy took AOC's attacks and used them to solidify himself as a fighter for working-class people. AOC must balance passion with precision if she wishes to win over additional Americans." Another article in The Hill highlighted how this moment was one of reminder regarding the importance of constructive dialogue, cautioning that personal attacks only deepen the divide. Social media would not let the moment lie. A widely followed TikTok user with more than 1 million followers dissected Kennedy's body language, measured stare, and few movements, making him look to be in charge while making AOC look reactive. Within hours, the clip racked up millions of views, filling the comment box with comments such as, "Kennedy is a master of quiet confidence." Meanwhile, AOC's supporters created their own social media campaign, asking people to shift attention back to her climate message. One posting stated, "AOC battles for us. Kennedy simply speaks circles," riling her following. But within her ranks, there were some who quietly admitted that AOC had misjudged Kennedy and let him turn her shots back on her. The cultural aftershocks cascaded far wider than the Senate walls. On social media platforms such as Facebook and Reddit, threads broke out regarding how Kennedy represented those usually forgotten due to having Southern accents or rural origins. A Reddit entry with thousands of upvotes told the tale of a Southerner who was stereotyped for her voice, referring to Kennedy as a hero for the overlooked. Environmental organizations were rock solid behind AOC, but others conceded she had to change her style to attract moderate voters. A message by a young climate activist on Instagram stated, "AOC is our voice, but we need sharper strategies to win over people like Kennedy." The incident also highlighted the role of the media in determining narratives. The critics contended that far too many media outlets dwelled on the drama of the confrontation and not its content. A report on an independent news outlet wrote, "While AOC and Kennedy clashed, the larger question, how to save the planet, was drowned out in the din." But for all the criticism, networks and platforms kept the debate going, asking commentators and pundits to dissect every look, word, and move. One analyst put it best in an imaginary interview. Kennedy didn't win solely on rhetoric. He had an ability to take a moment and make it a symbol. When the media frenzy died down, the waves from this hearing refused to subside. From the respectful silence of the Senate hearings room to the chattering strands of social media, the Kennedy-AOC confrontation turned into something more than a discussion. It turned into a mirror, reflecting the passions, divisions, and hopes of a nation lost for direction. The viral video, now watched millions of times, became a symbol, not only of two individuals jousting, but of the values and visions that characterized an era. As the media firestorm gradually dissipated, what was left weren't sound bites or tweets alone, but deep lessons which lasted well after the hearing was over. Not only for AOC and Kennedy, but for anyone who observed. This salient confrontation between Kennedy's cool, quick demeanor and AOC's passionate fervor was a reminder that politics is not all about ideas. It's about how we present them. AOC, with her inimitable urgency and desire for change, spoke fervently about a world in crisis. But when she decided to make it personal, she called Kennedy a joke, ridiculed his Southern flair. She lost the sympathy of impartial observers. Kennedy pushed back with quiet strength, sticking to sincerity and measured words. In concentrating on the people he spoke for, as opposed to taking shots at AOC, he rallied those who felt ignored due to their voice or their background. His calm became a representation of dignity, a reminder that strength doesn't always reside in volume. Sometimes it glows brighter in restraint. A Reddit user, writing in a post that tallied thousands of upvotes, distilled the moment best. Kennedy and AOC both desire good things, but how they expressed it defined how we perceive them. It's a very basic but deep observation. Politics, as with life itself, requires a harmony between passion and respect. AOC is still a shining example for a generation starved of radical change, but this time it serves as a reminder that it is possible to burn bridges at a price. Kennedy, meanwhile, cemented himself as the voice of conservative values and sensible solutions. But even he has an issue, making sure those values don't become impediments to change, but beacons that bring people together. The confrontation between AOC and Kennedy was more than a Senate hearing. It was a mirror to a closely divided America, a country trying to find its way through divisions between generations, regions, and ideologies. AOC's passionate call to action resonates with the heart of a younger urban generation, but her broadside exposed a misstep. That passion can be diminished when it fails to value the power of listening. Kennedy, with his soft-spoken, practical style, took that assault and made it a lesson in integrity, gaining the respect of peers and viewers both. In this polarized world of ours, influenced by moments that detonate across social media and consume the news cycle, this tale reminds us of something essential. Respect and empathy aren't weaknesses. They're the instruments we must use to break down prejudices and construct bridges between various perspectives. AOC can still mobilize the young, but she has to learn to dialogue and not just counterattack. Kennedy, as well, must make sure that values won't remain static and must catch up with a changing country to remain relevant and inclusive. We can all learn this lesson, in our offices, classrooms, or cyberspaces. Rather than critiquing each other by voice, background, or belief, we can first listen, seek common ground, and walk towards a better future together. Thank you for joining this dramatic ride between AOC and Kennedy. Don't forget to subscribe so that you won't miss more such stories that define America. Stories where moments of conflict bring out lessons for all of us. Catch you in the next video.